Hello, good morning. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. A reminder of our top stories here this morning. And Hamas has released 2 American hostages in Gaza as violent clashes continue in Gaza and the West Bank. Aid stands still on Egypt's border with Gaza as world leaders meet in Cairo to try to break the deadlock. And a second red weather warning is in place as Storm Babette kills 3 people and causes widespread disruption in England and Scotland. Also, the government says it will standardise the number of recycling bins for homeowners in England 2026. So time to look at the papers, and in a moment we'll be discussing them with PR and crisis management expert Kevin Craig and anthropologist Marianne Hotter. So good morning to both of you. Nice to see you both. Let's take a look, though, at the front pages first, shall we? And the Times pictures mother and daughter Judith and Natalie Raanan, who were freed tonight by their Hamas captors, or last night, I should say. The Raanans are also on the front of the Eye. Suggesting an invasion of Gaza could be imminent, the Mirror has the headline, Deadly Wait. The Daily Mail meets a young woman conscripted into the Israeli army from her job in an ad agency who's about to start fighting for her country. The Financial Times reports that Israel intends to sever ties to the Gaza Strip once the current conflict is over. The Telegraph reveals that a planned terror attack in the UK, allegedly by an asylum seeker linked to Gaza, has been foiled by the authorities. The Express hears that Conservative insiders reacting to yesterday's double by-election loss believe the best way to win back the electorate is to demonstrate so-called true blue values. While The Guardian quotes a victorious Keir Starmer saying that Labour is redrawing the political map. While The Star offers pearls of wisdom from an AI chatbot that apparently believes that all humans are aliens living on a planet run by Elon Musk. And I'm pleased to say that I have seen that story on my list of stories to talk about. I think that's right, if we get time to get to it. But Kevin Craig and Marianne Hotter here, morning to you. Again, a lot of headlines focusing on the Israel-Hamas conflict and a series of grim news. But amongst that, we do have the pictures of Judith and Natalie Raanan on the front pages, 2 hostages who've been released overnight. Kevin, you picked out the Times for their coverage first.
Yes, I did. And, you know, whilst it's positive for these 2 people that they have been released, immediately thoughts go to what about all the other people? I mean, they've got American passports, so that's some result for Joe Biden's diplomacy efforts, but I'm thinking about the many, many other people who are still in captivity. And if you look at this front page article in the Times, I think it reminds us of what we're dealing with here in Hamas when we see that they're in their quote to go with the release of these 2 hostages, and they call about proving points to the world that claims made by Biden and his fascist administration. So, you know, I'm obviously pleased about 2 people being released from this horror, but what about the rest of the hostages? I think it's just 2 weeks today. Is it 2 weeks since this happened? And I think, you know, in all the discussion about this, and notwithstanding the horrors being laid upon innocent people in Gaza, go back and, listeners and viewers, check out @Israel, the Twitter account of the Israeli government, and remember what happened 2 weeks ago, which has triggered us into this horrible situation. Great that 2 are released. What about the rest?
Well, yeah, it does raise a lot of questions, doesn't it, about what could happen to the rest and why Hamas have released these hostages now. Clearly, a certain amount of diplomacy going on behind the scenes, not least between Qatar and Hamas.
And of course, you've got the scenes that you were showing in the news earlier of these trucks waiting just at the Egyptian border, desperate to get through. You know, you've got the UN, you've got Antonio Guterres, you've got the big aid agencies using language that they don't normally use, really beyond exasperated, because they can see, I think I read that the UN are now limiting, in some places in Gaza, a ration of 1 litre of water per person, where the humanitarian minimum stipulation should be 15 litres. That's for everything. 1 litre of water is difficult simply if you're just drinking, let alone washing. Now, of course, the people in Gaza have been in what's basically an open-air prison for years, for generations almost, because the life expectancy is so low for some people that people were already in an incredibly vulnerable position before this began. And it did begin for innocent Israeli citizens perhaps 2 weeks ago, but for the Palestinians trapped in Gaza,
yeah, but hang on.
lot
yeah,
longer.
And no one disputes that, but you know, it is not mentioned in every discussion that I see or read about. You know, enough for me personally, what was inflicted upon those people in Israel 2 weeks ago today. Nobody denies that you cannot, and you reposted a tweet the other day, was very articulate, you cannot keep millions of people in captivity, we have to have a two-state solution. But in this country, in Britain, if what had happened to our citizens in the same way, if that had happened in Israel 2 weeks ago, that's the context of the terrible situation unfolding, and I just want to always mention that in the very valid point you make about living conditions in Gaza right now.
And as far as the humanitarian aid is concerned, there has been talk for days now that a small number of vehicles may be imminently going to cross.
Yeah,
the border,
all of 20 lorries for 2 million people.
Yeah, and still it hasn't happened. So we'll wait for news on that one.
But I think you're right, the kind of the wider context of who were having these diplomatic chess games, sort of not even behind the scenes, but sort of attempting to shift the chess pieces on this kind of global board is key.
Yeah, absolutely. Take us to the FT, though, for now, Mary-Anne, because there was an interesting briefing given by the Israeli Defence Minister yesterday, who laid out some of the Israeli government's intentions. They talked about wanting to eliminate Hamas. We know that, but he talked about other stages that they're planning.
Yes, that's right. So in the most simple terms, it's a 3-phase campaign, apparently. The first is, and I'm quoting here, this is not my analysis of this, but a new security reality in which Israel would no longer, quote, have responsibility for life in the Gaza Strip, and that they would disconnect the umbilical cord, essentially meaning that previously, prior to the terrorist attack that happened 2 weeks ago, there was some very limited movement over the border. So some Gazans would come into Israeli territory to work, for example. Some businesses would be able to do modest trade over the border. So apparently this is now all in the past. And what will happen, first of all, is that, again, I quote, neutralising terrorists and destroying Hamas infrastructure. That's what this ground offensive is purportedly focused on. The second would be eliminating pockets of resistance in Gaza, if anything is still standing by that point. And then the third would be this removal of responsibility for life. And that there would be a buffer zone within the Gaza Strip that would create a sort of demilitarized, like no man's zone before the border. So you wouldn't have people living right up close to the border or being able to even access that land. Bearing in mind that the Gaza Strip, I mean, if you look at a kind of Google Earth image, you can see the intensity of how many people are crammed into this incredibly small territory. And then the kind of the vast expanses of kind of agricultural land on the other side. And for those who survive the next few phases of this astonishing attack, we wait and see, but it's grim on all fronts.
And I think that the FT piece that Mary-Anne's flagged is particularly significant because it's a very clear statement from Israel that there will be no future reoccupation of Gaza. They intend to cut ties, and that is linked to the existential threat that they feel with regard to the existence of Israel as a country. And I mean, it is bad news, as Mary-Anne says, for for people in Gaza. But this is a response, again, and a consequence of the terrorist actions of 2 weeks ago today, and it's terrible.
OK, and let's, in fact, it was Kevin that you wanted to talk about the Telegraph's front page as well. They talk about a terrorist attack that has apparently, we're told, been foiled in the UK.
Yeah, and this is actually a really disturbing story, because actually the front page of the Telegraph details are sketchy here for legal reasons. reasons about what has actually happened, and it talks about an asylum seeker bent on avenging deaths in Gaza has undertaken actually an attack in the UK. There are no details on this; they're not released, and it reminds us, number one, of the work going on by the security services, which often is unheralded in terms of what they manage to do to protect people of all faiths and backgrounds in this country. But it is, these things are hard to localise to nation states in the modern world. And there is rightful concern amongst people across this country about border security because of the way that things can come to our own shores. And this is worth a very detailed read, but the details are not actually published. And Sir Ian Duncan Smith is in this article talking about people's desire to know what's gone on.
Yeah, we're out of time, unfortunately. Oh. I'm so sorry, but we've got 2 more paper reviews, so we can come back.
I'll tell you all about the AI chatbot.
The AI chatbot, I promised, and I didn't deliver. So we really must get back to that, and lots of politics around the papers as well. So loads to talk about in future hours, but for the moment, both of you, thanks very much indeed.